The nervous system is the underlying mechanism of how we experience the world. It's the governor that allows us to either perform optimally or in a reduced state. In elite sports, it comes down to milliseconds of decision making. The way to get into flow state is that we have to have motor activation in our brain, we have to have interest, and then we need to have focus. Life isn't about staying in a relaxed state. It's about state shifting and context shifting. An athlete making about 20,000 decisions throughout the course of a game. And if you can increase an individual's capacity by 5% at that level, that's the difference between being a good player and being the player on the field.
Today on the Neurovision Edge Podcast, I'm joined by Cameron Allen, the founder of Neuroprogeny and the mind behind X-Regulation, a technology that's doing something genuinely new, letting the nervous system see itself. Cameron's work begins from a deceptively simple idea, that your nervous system has never made a mistake. Every pattern it runs, even the ones that exhaust us, made sense at some point. The question he's interested in isn't how to fix those patterns, but what becomes possible when the system can finally observe itself clearly in real time without judgment. To make that possible, he's built the first true nervous system mirror, immersive VR biofeedback that renders your heart rate variability as a living environment, not numbers on a screen, experience you can actually see and feel. He doesn't talk about treatment, optimization, or chasing permanent calm. He talks about capacity, the ability to move through states, to activate fully and recover fully, and to come back to yourself. Whether you're a founder, a clinician, a caregiver, an athlete, or just someone who sensed there's more capacity in you than you've been able to reach, I think you're going to find this conversation open something up.
When it comes to personality types, analytical thinkers versus people who are super stressed, maybe ADHD.
The physiology will actually change consistently across the board, but perception of that change is very different. For most people, it takes an average of 3 months for somebody to perceive that they actually are doing something different.
Athletes should really know the foundation pieces here. Heart rate variability, sympathetic versus parasympathetic, and how does that incorporate in athletic performance in games? Well, first off, thank you for being on the show. I'm actually really excited about this. I think a lot of athletes are going to find this super valuable. So let's jump right in. Many athletes hear about nervous system training. What the heck is this? Why should you be training your nervous system? Why does it even matter?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think that when we think about the nervous system, it's broken down into, we've got the brain, we've got the spinal column, we've got the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system. We've got all these different pieces, but what does that actually mean? And essentially what that means for each one of us is that it's what we notice, it's what we feel, it's what we're capable of observing. It is how much stress can we tolerate, how much emotional activation is coming up in the background before it starts fogging and really pulling away from our processing speed, from our target identification, from our reaction time. And so the nervous system is really the underlying mechanism of how we experience the world around us. And then really it's the governor. It's the thing that allows us to either perform optimally or perform at a reduced state. So it's really the underlying thing that's turning up or down the volume on all of the internal noise that pulls us away or contributes to our ability to perform really well.
So I think I'm going to ask the question that everyone listening is going to be asking, how do we actually make this governor do what we want it to? How do we get us to perform in games the max ability that we have?
Absolutely. So what it comes down to is that in order for us to perform really, really well, we can't have background programs of the computer of our brain running and us still have the resources to be present, observe what's happening, and just respond. When we're in a game, we have to be able to just see and react. And we have to do that with very rapid analysis. And so the way that we do that in our nervous system is really by training to be very, very aware of those subtle internal narratives, stories, and everything that we're telling ourselves on a momentary basis that actually create layers of processing. So we need to get those narratives out of the way so that we can actually be 100% present with acting and really relying heavily on the skills that we have trained into our nervous system and into our repertoire to be able to go out and just perform.
So you mentioned the narrative we tell ourselves, and that's huge, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of sports psychology, mental training. It's big on the narrative. What's your story?
Yeah.
What are the labels you tell yourself? How much of that is nervous system training versus how much is the physicality of actually doing body-based movements, training, let's say, the Neurovision or the different aspects of trainings that we have?
Yeah,
What's
it's
that
a
percentage?
great
How much is it?
question. Well, I'm going to go just a little bit deeper and then back up to answer that directly. That when we look at those internal narratives, the real challenge with it is that it's coming from a brain network called the default mode network that is all about kind of pulling up our autobiographical memory. But the problem is our default mode network isn't an accurate autobiographical memory. So it is telling us all kinds of stories just to make sense of whatever internal experience we're having. So let's say that you get out there and you're about to swing on a golf ball and you're focused, you're in it, and all of a sudden you swing and you shank it. Now, what's happening is that default mode network is saying, you knew you were going to do that. You always pull to this side. You raised your head, you lifted, you twisted your body, you got tense. So the next time you get up there to swing again, now the default mode network is, hey, remember, don't screw up. Don't pull. Don't make sure you keep your head down. Make sure you rotate. Don't get tense. And so now you've got layers of processing happening. The salience network, the ability to focus on whatever's important to you, is now no longer just focused on the ball and feeling the motor movement of the action. Now you're focused on the story. And now you're sitting there arguing with the story subconsciously. The story's still playing and you have to perform. Now your brain timing is being pulled off ever so slightly. And as we know in sports, especially in elite sports, it comes down to milliseconds of decision making. So if you've got that internal narrative happening, then it's going to pull you out. So now to zoom back out to your question, that all of it comes down to the nervous system. And all of those other pieces you mentioned, whether it's neurovision, whether it's training the musculature, whether it's the muscle memory, all of those pieces are just processes that are all underneath the nervous system. Those are all things that are happening and in the integrated nervous system. But if your sympathetic or your parasympathetic nervous system are out of balance, now all of a sudden those internal resources, the visual system, the default mode network, the executive networks, all these networks of our brain that allow us to operate in perfect coordination, they're competing with each other for resources rather than working together in synchrony in order to create a fluid performance. So it all comes down to how regulated and how balanced is your nervous system, and everything else comes out of that.
You know, there's a lot of talk about flow state.
Mm-hmm.
Now, flow state, it sounds like to me, at least with, I put a lot of energy into flow state here, to learn about flow state, to try to get my athletes to flow state. And from what I've learned and from what I've seen that works is you have to have your nervous system regulated to reach flow state. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So it's interesting. So I've worked with some veterans that were doing high-speed driving as a mechanism to actually work with PTSD. And so as we look at individuals that are experiencing PTSD, of course, their nervous system is not generally in a terribly regulated state. Their nervous system is in more of a sympathetic nervous system state, a little in hyperarousal. So what's interesting is the way to get into flow state is that we have to have motor activation in our brain. We have to actually have some movement, some processing of movement. It has to be a task that is slightly above our capacity. We have to have interest, and then we need to have focus. There's a few other minor pieces, but those are the key pieces that all come together. So if you, let's say, for instance, an individual who has, I'll use the military example. Those guys got in there, the adrenaline, norepinephrine, cortisol, oxytocin, the ability, so your stress chemicals, the oxytocin to feel safe and to feel connected, and the dopamine to feel motivated and excited, all were in a really good balance with acetylcholine, which balances out our ability to tolerate an elevated internal state, a heightened emotional state. So when that happened, now these individuals were able to cut through the noise of the hyperactive brain and drop into flow state. And then when they returned back to baseline, the whole nervous system was actually able to come down with it. Similarly, if you've got an individual that has ADHD symptoms, for instance, that's generally the sensory motor strip in the brain is coming a little bit further down. And so a lot of external stimuli, movement, being able to actually engage physically allows the sensory motor strip to come up. Now you can drop into flow state. So this is one of the things that I think is really important, is that we all have certain areas of our life where our nervous system is really good and really well regulated if we're getting the right inputs. And then there's other areas where we're not going to serve as well. With CEOs, sometimes you see in the boardroom and in a negotiation, man, they're there, they can lock on. Yeah. But the moment that they have to sustain showing up with a screaming child at home or an argument with their wife, now it takes forever for them to emotionally recover from that. And that there's a lot of internal narrative. So each one of us have these areas that we are really regulated in, other areas that we're not. And it's all about getting the appropriate input. So if we know that we have more of a tendency to where we like a lot of movement, and as soon as we get a lot of movement and we're in, now we're going to flow. But what happens when the game slows down? What happens when it's not at that excitement level? Because if we need that increased level of activation, now our brain's allostatic load, the stress set point that it needs in order to say, okay, let's get the adrenaline pumping, let's get the brain engaged, let's get the sensory motor online, and let's perform. Yeah. Now we're down in this lull. And so now we're going to end up oftentimes making mistakes. And then we use the guilt and the shame and beating ourselves up in the default mode network to push ourselves back into performance. But now again, we're running in the narrative and in the processing. And so until our nervous system catches up to that adrenaline state and moves back into flow, then we're going to constantly be just slightly off and not performing completely at our best.
I have a quarterback that you pretty much summed up perfectly. He needs the pressure. Otherwise, he cannot perform. Like he is a really good scrambler. He is really good when that pressure is there. So he's like, he's that fourth quarter quarterback. But if they're winning by a lot, if that pressure isn't there, then that focus is like gone. So how would I train this athlete? Let's say we have someone who does well with that amount of allostatic load and pressure. But when things are different, they're not. How do we get them to the level? Like, are we forcing pressure there to get them there, externally? Or are we training them to regulate their nervous system?
Yeah. So I think this is where it's really interesting at looking at coaching modalities and how do we coach that. For some people, it's drive harder, pull a Michael Jordan, pull a Tiger Woods, where you just internally up the ante, increase the competition, boost the adrenaline and boost the release of testosterone and push your way through and white knuckle it. But eventually you're going to burn out. You're going to stop performing at your best. Or we go the other route where we actually are able to train the nervous system to drop in, and then you can intentionally escalate when you need to, drop back when you need to. And that really depends on the individual. So if it's somebody that really is craving a lot of sensory input and they need that sensory engagement in order for their brain to come up, then being able to train more of the vestibular and the proprioceptive input, do a lot of your workouts and your guided visualizations, doing bilateral, like stand on one leg or the other leg on a balance board or on a vibe plate, so that you're getting a lot of that sensory input that is actually allowing you to reset the allostatic load and bring it down. Being able to do eyes closed so the visual network isn't attenuating or shutting down the sensory network. Because as you know, from your work, that training the visual system is fantastic. It helps us be able to lock on. It helps us to process. It helps us to be able to engage in a lot more situational awareness. And if we overtrain that and don't bring the sensory system up, now we're actually training our brain into hypervigilance rather than into just that balanced piece. And so that's where I think a lot of your work is amazing, how you are able to integrate that piece and that you really look at the whole person and then come down to like, let's sharpen the knife by doing the visual system work. And so I think that then if it's another type of individual where everything's pretty well regulated in the sensory system, and you've got a quarterback who can stay generally regulated, can continue to read the game all the way through, but then they get to a place where they're missing a few throws and they just can't recover from it. That has a whole lot more to do with learning how to actually drop back down into the body, feel the experience of what's happening, and be able to recognize the internal narratives. And it goes beyond mindfulness work. The way that and we oftentimes train it, and the way that I prefer training it after 20 years of doing this, is being able to train heart rate variability in kind of a virtual reality environment where we're training both resilience, your ability to come back to a baseline state, and you're training the LFHF ratio simultaneously, which is the ability to actually shift states on command. For most of us, right, when emotional activation happens, we use talking ourselves down, or we try to figure out a way of let's breathe ourselves back into regulation. But when we actually train those over time, what ends up happening is that the nervous system actually expands capacity. And so there's not attachment to, I messed up, I'm going to do this again. The narratives aren't being triggered. And it's just a matter of, all right, now I'm back to just being 100% present and watching the options that are right in front of me. So I think it's a great question you ask, but it really is so individualized to what's happening in that person's nervous system, so we can customize and tailor exactly what their nervous system is needing. Is it sensory? Is it emotional? Is it belief systems? Is it really brain processing? Or is it kind of the hypothalamus, the actual timing and the thalamus of the brain? That's the timing of the brain that's saying like, wait a minute, this information is coming in, the ball's coming at me, but now I'm, hundredths of a second off on my brain timing. So my hands are going to get behind the ball rather than on it. And so I'm going to drop the ball more frequently. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the way you put it. Slightly scientific, but the thalamus is huge on this portion. Mm-hmm. But if we segue into something you touched on, which I think is something we should probably dive deeper into, is why breathing alone won't fix the nervous system.
Yeah.
Can we go a little deeper on that?
Absolutely. So I'm going to set the caveat that breath work is fantastic. Breathing exercise is great. Mindfulness and meditation is fantastic. I work with a whole lot of individuals that have been practicing meditation, contemplative practice, Buddhism, all kinds of things for years and years and years. And so here's an example. There was a lady who is very high functioning CEO, runs multiple companies, and has been a practicing Buddhist for 40 years. And she had a trauma in early childhood that she just never could connect with her body. Everything felt like whenever she tried to feel into her body and connect with her body, all of a sudden, like it just felt like there was a reaction, that there just wasn't, something was missing there. And so she always stayed in her head and was very analytical. And we all know these players who are really analytical, and they're constantly looking at the technical pieces, and they're trying to stay in control of the game. But the problem is that after a while, your brain is going to fatigue because you only have so much chemical activity to go around. There's only so much neural real estate to go around. So that burns out. So for this individual, she had been practicing mindfulness, which is really, really good for increasing the frontal cortex to be able to focus, attend, be able to move into decision making. but it's not very good for increasing processing speed. So for her, she was sitting here and she could white knuckle her way through anything. She could focus her way through anything, but it was taking a toll on her. And as she got older, it got to the point where she couldn't keep up because the cognitive resources were starting to go down. So what we did differently through training the virtual reality biofeedback side of it, all of a sudden with that capacity expanding, all the balls she felt like she was juggling for years, she was able to just kind of pick up the one that mattered and then put it back down. And she was able to feel that connection between her brain and body. So going back to your question, the really important piece is that breath, just breathing and just mindfulness and meditation is very much a practice of the mind. And the mind and the body have to stay connected. There's a positive feedback loop between the brain and the body. And why this is important is that the sensory information that we're collecting in our body is coming in, and our body is actually handing the brain, here's a 3D picture of your world. Here is everything you have to pay attention to and attend to. If the body is not sending all of that information completely, now our brain has to predict what's missing, and then we make up the gaps. That takes a little bit of processing speed. So you're stealing a little bit of what's left in that neural real estate to focus on that rather than what's actually right in front of you. The other piece of it is that if the body is not connecting to the brain effectively, we're not releasing as much oxytocin. Why is that important? Because oxytocin allows us to feel grounded and feel connected with our body. So all of those signals that are coming in, all the tactile movements of if you're tackling somebody and being able to actually get them and bring them down, if you are trying to catch a ball, you know where you are in space and time compared to where that ball is, so you can actually get it. So that brain and body connection is extremely important. And so just doing more contemplative and meditative practices, the research shows that for the most part, it's really increasing the prefrontal cortex, the executive network, and its ability to quiet down the internal narrative. But mostly it's actually creating a frame of reference for us to be able to compare our life to. So that's where we get most of the calm, is that we can say, okay, we know what this baseline calm state is, and I know how far off of it I am if I'm feeling stressed. So it's very, very useful, but it doesn't actually authentically create a clear feedback loop between the sensory system, the motor system, the cranial nerves, and the brain, so that we're getting all the information we need from the world around us.
So how do we create the brain-body connection to be better?
Yeah. So, there's a lot of traditional ways of going about it. I've got my biases in using objective metrics. And so I'll start with the low tech kind of ways of going about it. And then I'll speak a little bit about the higher tech ways of going about it. The lower tech ways are really doing some things where we practice interoception. What's happening in our mind? So if we sit there and we are visualizing a play, and we're visualizing a situation that went sideways, and we're processing through, okay, so-and-so is here, 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 and here. I did this. This is what happened. And we're kind of doing an autopsy of the scenario, noticing the internal stories, the internal judgments, and also what is happening down through our body. What are the sensations that we're feeling? Is our body running cold? Are we feeling any kind of sensations? The somatic noticing of what's happening in our body. And so as a coach, being able to tie both of those things together, because oftentimes if we're not used to feeling that, and it feels frou-frou for a lot of people, and it feels like, why would I need to know that? I'm just going to get out there and go hit the person. I'm going to get out there and just go perform. But being able to tie that in and just notice it, now your brain isn't afraid of it. Anything that we judge as frou-frou, and like, why would I want to pay attention to the touchy-feely like of my body and what's coming up? That's all a judgment, that when that information comes up from your body, your brain is automatically saying, nope, that's not important, block it. And that actually takes a ton of energy to block it, because our body needs to send that sensory information through. The more attention we give it, and the more we're just like, yep, it's there, and we don't attach a judgment to it, we get used to it, it flows through, and now we're not afraid of ourselves. We're not afraid of the sensations that are coming up. We're not fighting with ourselves. So that's kind of the low tech way. And so
would you recommend then, let's say we have a pro player makes a mistake on the field, it's costly. Should they visualize and put themselves in that situation again and go over how they feel?
Absolutely.
Because there's many thoughts on this where some people say you don't want to do that, you want to ignore it, and you want to just move on from it.
Yeah.
So what's your thought process on this?
Well, the neuroscience is really clear. Anything that you push against and you reject, you build an attachment to it. And anything that you build an attachment to, let's say, for instance, I'm really trying in golf again, I'm really trying not to tense up my body when I swing. So I'm sitting there and I'm saying, I'm not going to tense up this time. I'm not going to tense up. Now, the reticular activating system that is very deep in our brain is sitting here, and it's the thing that if you buy a new car or you learn a new word, you see that car everywhere. You see that word everywhere. It's the thing that's supposed to remind us of what's important to us. And so it's doing a great job. It's saying, hey, buddy, don't tense up. But it's saying that right at the moment where you don't need to tense up. So it causes your body to tense up. So if you go into and you've messed up a play and you're just like, nope, ignore it, avoid it. Now your brain is going to say, whatever you do, don't think about the pink elephant. And so all that's going to happen subconsciously is you're going to start playing out the pink elephant until it becomes part of your identity. I am this person that does this thing, rather than being like, nope, I did this thing and here's a way around it. But I think here's a really big critical piece of it. We're not trying to move away from doing that thing. If we're just trying to say, I'm not going to tense up my body when I swing, then we're going to tense up. If I say, I want to feel fluidity in my swing, and so I'm going to pay attention to that fluidity, then now that's the thing that the spotlight of our mind is focused on. Our reticular activating system is reinforcing that within our nervous system. Now we can perform in a better way. But anytime we try to ignore something that has any level of emotional feel to it, or if we feel shame that we screwed up on the field and we reject it and we push it away, it will become part of our pattern. It will become part of our identity of play. So I think it's the crucial piece is not going into judgment about it. It's all data. It's all information. There's nothing more to it than that. And so keep out of the naming, I am a person who does this, or I am this mistake, and moving into, okay, here's what it was. Here's how it went down. Awesome. And so that informs, what do I want to have happen next time? So it's not sit there and dwell on it. It's visualize it. Now identify, like, what would I like the experience to be? Not, I don't want to tense up when I'm swinging. I don't want to overthrow the football. Now, what I really want to do is I want to be able to be in attunement with my teammate, know where they are on the field, and I want to read their movement so I can get the ball directly to them. Great. I'm going to visualize doing that now. So it's taking the power out of the negative experience, allowing it to inform what I desire and what I want. What are my deep values in how I'm playing? And then doing it, showing up, playing in that same aligned way. All of its data points. I think that's one of the things that I love about neuroscience and kind of the high-tech way of how I measure the nervous system. It's all numbers, and those numbers don't matter. It's just feedback. It's just something for us to look at. But our brain, oftentimes and throughout our entire life, we are trained in order to put a story to an experience in order to explain it away and make sense of it. But most of the stories we tell ourselves aren't accurate anyway. They don't actually fit. They fit close enough with the emotional experience that we don't have to deal with it anymore. But all it is data points. It doesn't have any reflection on who you are as a human being or what you're actually capable of. And if we can get that into our minds, then everything is just a curious learning experience, and we can be in perpetual growth, and we can be in that growth mindset of constantly rising above.
Yeah. I mean, the mind is crazy, and neuroscience, there's so much to it. But I mean, you could technically take a bad event, visualize, and tell your brain something else actually happened and change it to a positive event. And then your brain will actually remember that you actually did something positive when that never actually happened.
Yeah.
And
We are rewriting our
carry
memories
that memory.
constantly. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could rewrite the negative memories and change them with some strong visualization, which I think is a untapped resource for many athletes. But
It absolutely is.
now let's go to the higher tech. So that was the low tech. Let's go to high tech.
Cool. So, if we're looking at it through the lens of looking at, let's say, just heart rate variability, we can get into, reading brain waves through EEG, or we can look at a lot of other metrics of our nervous system. It's beautiful that even down to, the visual system, everything we can track and everything we can see now is incredible. But if we're looking at it just from the biofeedback side of things, that one of the most effective tools that I have come across is integrating the virtual reality with heart rate variability. And why this is really important is that and like I said, with the flow state piece, you have to be able to engage the motor system. And traditional biofeedback doesn't engage the motor system. All it's doing is watching your breathing. You're trying to get into a resonant breath frequency. You're trying to calm your brain down and trying to get this parasympathetic nervous system up. But life isn't about staying in a relaxed state. It's about state shifting and context shifting and being able to be flexible with, an athlete on the field on average is making about 20,000 decisions throughout the course of a game. And so if that's happening, you have to constantly be fluidly shifting between analysis and performance. So being in virtual reality activates the motor system because you're seeing the environment, you're hearing the environment, but you're not feeling it. So the thalamus and hypothalamus start rapidly scanning the body and the brain and saying, wait a minute, I'm missing some sensory information here. And so that quickly activates the sensory motor strip. And then on top of that, now we're doing the heart rate variability, where in this particular game that I've developed, you've got a fire on a rock and you're sitting next to a lake. And when the fire gets bigger, that means your resilience, your heart rate variability is going up, which means you can more reliably drop back down into that relaxed resting state if you want to.
Can you talk about this just terminology segment just for real quick?
Yeah.
Because I feel like athletes should really know kind of the foundation pieces here. So one, what is heart rate variability? How does that relate to your ability to change states and heart rate? And then two, what is sympathetic? What does it mean versus parasympathetic? And how does that incorporate in athletic performance and games?
Perfect. Yeah. So we'll start with the sympathetic and parasympathetic. So just from a baseline perspective, when your heart is contracting, that's the sympathetic. When your heart is relaxing, that's the parasympathetic. When you are going into a very focused state, you are going more into a sympathetic nervous system state. When you're going into kind of a rest and recovery state and you want to actually recover after a game, you want to drop into the parasympathetic so you can release the growth hormones to actually repair muscle tissue and all of that. And so there's this scale where throughout all situations, there's going to be those moments where you feel that flash in your body, you feel the adrenaline. Now you're into the sympathetic nervous system state. That state can only last for a short period of time before you burn through all those chemicals. And then you're actually going to oxidative stress, which is starting to break down your cells in order to stay in that state. So it's really important to not just be in the parasympathetic, the calm, rest, digest, recover state, or in the sympathetic, overactivated, locked on, performative state. So it's all about fluidly shifting states back and forth on command. So heart rate variability is a really interesting insight into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And there's a lot of different measurements that come out of heart rate variability, but the two that are really interesting and have a lot of research behind them is heart rate variability, which is really as your heart is beating, there are these really tiny differences between each heartbeat. Each heartbeat looks slightly different. And we want more variability. The more variability that's there means the more resilient our nervous system is. It has more access. If every heartbeat looks exactly the same, that actually means that we're in something called phase lock. We're rigid, we're focused, we're only using a very narrow band of all the resources that we actually have available in our brain and our nervous system. So we want to be able to see a difference in that. So when we're looking at the heart rate variability side, that's one piece of it. When we're looking at what's called the LFHF ratio, that's kind of this balance, and it's more nuanced than this, but it's the balance between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. So between that stress state and relaxed state. There's more to it than that, but we'll leave it there for now. But the way to think about this is, how much time are you spending actually feeling your experience versus thinking about your experience? And most of us spend a lot more time thinking about our experience. Even if we're not super analytical, we're still telling ourselves the story of, right now I'm on a podcast and I'm talking about the brain, and I'm talking about how we notice things. We're narrating it rather than just, I'm here, I'm present, I'm engaged, I'm just receiving and connecting. And so those two measurements are really interesting, because oftentimes for high achievers and athletes, when they get into the game and they're sitting there in front of the fire is really high and they've got a lot of resilience, but over the lake comes in a ton of fog, which means that they're in a higher LFHF ratio, more in that sympathetic nervous system tone. We see this with high performing athletes, attorneys, and moms mostly, that are really in this place where they have a lot of demands on them, and they perform far better and they're more resilient when they're stressed. But as soon as they calm down, now it's a very fragile state. Anything can spike them out of it. And so every time you get a spike, now you're consuming a ton of glucose, which your muscles need, and your brain is overusing. You're consuming a ton of neurochemicals to try to block the stress response. So now you've got your brain competing with itself rather than working together. And so if you're in there and you're watching and you're seeing, okay, my heart rate variability is going higher, and you might notice this on your smartwatch if you're watching sleep recovery and you're watching that kind of thing, you've got your heart rate variability, and the higher the number, generally the better. But the problem is, when you're wearing just a watch, it's not very granular. You're not getting specific information in real time in the moment. You're getting 15 minutes of information once an hour that's all averaged over the course of a day, which is fantastic for making lifestyle decisions. Should I have drank last night? Should I be eating this food? Should I get more sleep? Should I, it's wonderful for making these larger life decisions, or lifestyle decisions. But when we are looking at it in this game, it is real time. So if all of a sudden you start visualizing, man, I overthrew that throw, and all of a sudden you feel that heat in your body, you feel it even run cold. All of a sudden the fog's going to roll in super quick. You're going to see the emotional attachment that you had to that experience. And now you're beating yourself up and you're getting attached to the situation. But if you can just observe it, and the fog starts rolling back, now your brain is learning, oh, I can observe these experiences without having to feel the full intensity of the emotion that's attached to it. So I don't have to feel shame, guilt. I don't have to feel like I screwed up. I don't have to. Instead, I have options. I have the ability to choose how I want to show up. And it's incredible. I mean, over the course of 21 days, using this 7 to 10 minutes a day, we've actually seen an increase in brain regulation by 78%. I mean, by that alone, traditional heart rate variability, at best in that same time period was like 22 to 28%. And it's a huge difference. And so it's one of those things and you can do it wherever you are. You can do it wherever. So, but the real cool thing about seeing that data, in my opinion, is that all of the emotions are taken out of it. It doesn't matter. It's just the numbers. It's just, am I able to intentionally increase the fog that's coming in and then get rid of it again? Am I able to increase the size of the fire and make it smaller again? It's not about, no fog and a high fire. It's how intentionally can I actually bring it in and out? Because if I can do that fluidly, pretty much everything in life is something that I can just take in as information, adapt to it, and respond. And what's really interesting is that everybody that does it actually states that they actually feel far more connected. And incidentally, which I would love to hear your opinion on this at some point, is that individuals actually are reporting that their eyesight is better and their hearing is far better when their nervous system drops in and is regulated. I've got hypotheses about that, but I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I'm sure your hypotheses are along the same wavelength of what I'm going to say, but in general, if your nervous system, if you have more control over your nervous system, it's more regulated, you're, just like you said before, if you have a bunch of windows open on your computer, right, you're not going to be able, your processing speed will be slower. So your visual processing speed will increase, your auditory processing speed will be better. You're not having to multitask a lot with your brain. And so, when your brain has to fill in images, so let's say if we need to figure out in space where an object is, we have our depth perception, right? If the eye posture is slightly different than normal, and you have to actually make a compensation and put in some energy to figure out space, and you're multitasking with all these tabs open, that's going to be a little slower. Now, if you don't have all these tabs open, and you're just making that quick compensation, it's going to be much faster. You can run that across everything from peripheral vision to eye focusing to everything. And so I don't think we even need to test that. I think that's something that you and I probably see all the time.
Absolutely. It's just so fascinating to see how just these subtle things, when somebody is such an elite athlete and operating at the highest level of the game, that even something as simple as that completely shifts the outcome. And if you can increase an individual's capacity by 5% at that level, that's the difference between like being a good player and being the player on the field. And it's wild that it comes down to that.
I was excited for you to come on because, like, my biggest thing I want athletes to, to be able to do is like have control over their shift of states, right? Be able to control your body, your brain, your eyes, your whole reaction to the external environment. And if you can change, if you can get into flow state on command, then you're maximizing the output you're going to deliver.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's for anybody. Me and you, for CEOs, for anybody. It's such a good thing. And you mentioned moms, and I know this is a random tangent because I see this with my wife all the time. Moms are probably the most overstimulated people on earth.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
They got the kids, they're multitasking, they're working. They're just so overstimulated. I have so many moms that come in with, my vision goes blurry in and out. They'll have random issues with vision, with their nervous system. And it's all from them being overly sympathetic because they're just so stressed out and they don't know how to regulate.
No. And it's incredible. And then to get to that place where you've gone into oxidative stress for being there so long, whether it's as an athlete, as a mom, and then like for athletes, you can blow off steam and go dopamine seek and get a bunch of dopamine to shut the system down, get GABA to be able to like distract. And even though it's not fully repairing the system, at least you've got distraction. As moms, like there's nothing. You can't go and go off the rails. You can't go and just get away from it. You're in it all the time. And so that oxidative stress gets to the place where adrenal fatigue kicks in, and and then you see all the peripheral side effects that come out: vision, hearing, and it's pretty incredible that what moms can handle.
So your VR, it
Mhm.
has built in that feedback system to help
Yeah.
you start to control your own state shifting, right? Where
Hmm.
how much do you need to go in one direction versus the other direction? How
Yeah.
does it actually do that for, let's say, an athlete? He puts on the VR headset. What does this
Mhm.
process look like?
Yeah. So you're putting on the headset. You've got a armband that is measuring heart rate variability, and it connects to the headset by Bluetooth. And then the game automatically starts in the headset, and you're sitting there and you actually reach down, pick up the box of matches, pick up a match, you light the match, and you light your fire in the game. And then you're sitting there next to the water, and the game calibrates, and then the feedback happens. If you're in more of that high LFHF ratio, the fog starts rolling in. If you're in that, whatever heart rate variability state, the fire is going to respond. So if you're in a state for a certain period of time, the fire gets bigger. If you come out of that state for a certain period of time, it goes down. You're getting points every time you make a recovery. So every time you shift one way or another, you're able to get kind of build points. And then in the game, it's really interesting, and we've kept it super simple. It was designed by an incredible developer that works with us, who learned from a Disney Imagineer how to actually create virtual reality spaces that tap into the neurophysiology of how to make a place and how to actually embed memories by using an environment. So it really is very intentionally designed to be simple, but it's deceptively simple. There's a few things you can play with. You can pick up a stick and light it on fire and wave it around. You can kind of throw the matchbox in the fire and the fire gets bigger. And a few things that you can tinker with and play with, that if people are just sitting there and they're just quiet and calm, most people initially have a really difficult time figuring out how to state shift. But as soon as they pick up the stick and they're moving around and they're playing, they're getting enough motor activation to be able to suppress some of that internal noise in their brain. And so now they can actually drop into that regulation a little bit more. And then
So,
yeah,
so I'm imagining myself doing this right now, right?
yes.
Okay, I'm in the headset. I see this stuff. What if, like, there's no coaching, right? So no one's telling you, okay, do this or think about this or try this. So is it just like your self experimentation to see what works and what doesn't work?
So there is that. So we've got a few options. There is the ability for coaches to actually see it in real time remotely. So you can be doing coaching sessions with them, and you could be talking through a game or a play or a behavior,
Okay,
and you can
perfect.
watch when their nervous system spikes and you can give feedback on that level. Or it can be the self exploration. And even in the early iteration of this, when I was just like, I'm not going to give anybody any instructions, go out and try to see what happens. It was
Yeah.
fascinating that after sitting in that environment for 7 to 10 sessions, and again, they're roughly between 7 and 15 minute sessions, depending on what you want to do, that almost everybody hit the same point where they're like, I'm trying to control this. Every now and again, I can see how I think about this and this would happen. I can kind of calm down, but my normal way of like regulating or calming down doesn't seem to work. But after about 7 to 10 sessions, all of a sudden, there's this point where they reach acceptance. And when they move into acceptance and shift over into curiosity, now all of a sudden, they can start controlling the environment and they can start engaging with it in a different way. And so when we look at the data, again, going back to the data, initially people generally do really well. Then novelty wears off, the dopamine goes away and the novelty wears off. So it gets harder. And then we see this curve happen where they start going back up. And so we can see when you hit that point of frustration where the novelty wears off, you're releasing the stress chemicals, primarily norepinephrine, that then causes a little bit of agitation and frustration. That is the initial part of when neuroplasticity actually begins.
Okay,
Then
that's
when
where
we
the
go
learning
through
starts.
Yes. And then we have to go through a REM cycle after that frustration in order for it to actually turn into neuroplasticity. And then we can see this curve where they get better and better and better and better, and they perform better and better and better. And they get to this point where it plateaus on the other side. And so it's just really interesting how the brain observing itself cannot help but change. It has to change. We cannot watch, if we sit there and we look at a behavior that we have coming up and somebody points it out to us, we can't keep doing that same behavior in the same exact way and get the same reward for it anymore. Our brain says, actually, now that I know what I'm doing, it takes a lot more metabolic energy and it takes a lot more resources for me to do that and feel good about it. So naturally, those things tend to shift over time unless we have an attachment to it, unless we're beating ourselves up or we have shame about it or something like that, then we'll reinforce it. But, and this is just on a cellular level, our brain, we're going through operant conditioning where our brain is figuring out how to put us into that state far more than our conscious mind can. And this is so challenging for people to step back into a place of trust in their nervous system to say, no, I know that this is going to work. And to be able to then jump back into your mind and be analytical, observe, engage, however you want. But also being able to trust that your brain is going to figure it out for you and actually create the resources and expand that capacity before you even have to do a ton of work with it. But it's so hard for us to let go and to drop into that state, especially as a CEO and as somebody who has always been high performing. For me, it was like, I want to be able to do something to see these results. Yeah. And there is some doing, but so much of it is trusting that the operant conditioning and how our brain does 90% for us anyway. And this is one of those situations where it really takes over and the data shows us that it's pretty consistent for everybody.
When it comes to personality types, have you noticed this being better for certain personalities over others? Like analytical thinkers versus, people who are super stressed, maybe ADHD.
Mm-hmm. What's been really interesting, and this is through 20 plus years of working with biometrics and working with EEG and working with, pupillometry, eye tracking, everything. The thing that I've seen that is very consistent across the board is that the neurophysiology, our brain and our nervous system, will change almost spot on. There's only a slight standard deviation for certain things, whether there's sensory stuff coming up or there's a TBI or developmental delay. There's some other things that are in there that'll influence this. But overall, let's level the playing field of, individuals that just are looking at personality type. The physiology will actually change consistently across the board. But perception of that change is very different. For most people, it takes an average of 3 months for somebody to perceive that they actually are doing something different. So you take an athlete who has performed a particular way, they start working with a new coach that they're doing really well with. It's still going to take them 3 months for them to not have to borrow their coach's belief in them and for them to actually recognize, I am the type of person that performs this way. And so the personality piece comes in with, if somebody's hyper analytical, they will see evidence of the change, but they will generally find reasons that are unrelated to this or to the coaching or whatever that is causing the change. Oh, I must have gotten better sleep. Oh, this must have been different. And then over time, they're like, no, this is genuinely different. I'm not in arguments with my wife. I'm not taking forever to recover after I screw up in a game. And so that's the big piece, is just the personality component influences kind of perception of change.
That's the funny thing about vision training too, and neurovision training, is we set up at our first training is a 12-week program. And the reason we do 12 weeks is it takes 3 months for them to see the gains. And it's not because that's how long it takes. It's because of the perception.
Yeah.
They finally put it together of why they're getting better is from, the faster reaction time or the issues that we were working on.
Yeah.
And so it's funny that there's so much tie-in here.
There totally is. One of the things I think is really interesting that has accelerated that for us, and it took me years to get to this place of doing it. I went out and I looked for coaching software online, like community type software, like Circle Community or School, and these other things where I could get a bunch of people in that are going through the same experience where they could communicate. And those platforms just didn't work very well for us. And so I wrote an entire platform where coaches are actually jumping in. They have their people that they're coaching underneath, and we'll have up to 16 people in the same cohort doing this, and they'll be in the chat and they'll be talking, and it's really the peer-to-peer relationships that have actually accelerated this. And it makes perfect sense that when we're connecting with others and we're releasing oxytocin, we drop into a place of trust and we drop into a place of safety where our nervous system can integrate and we can be open to exploring possibility. And that shifted it from the 3-month mark to where now within a 5-week protocol, every one of those people that are the high performers that were like, screw this, and are now in a place where they're like, oh my gosh, I'm seeing evidence. And then the other thing that I found has been really useful is priming the reticular activating system, really being able to say, hey, what are your 3 wins that you want to experience this today? They're not goals. They're not intentions. They're not something for you to set out to try to experience. You're just going to watch to see if they happen that day. And then at night, looking back at the day and saying, what were the 3 wins? And if for most people, they can't find them. They don't know what a win actually feels like during the day. But, one guy was like, I argued with my wife today and I was actually able to come back and recover from it quickly and go back into communication. That was the win. It doesn't have to be a positive thing. Yeah. It's the win of how do you handle what's coming up? Yeah. And that's the only other piece that kind of I changed at the same time that has accelerated the outcome so much because now we're not in negative attentional bias. And I think this is huge for athletes because when we're high performing, our left frontal cortex overactivates and we're constantly scanning for things to go wrong because we want to solve the problem. We want to jump in. We want to be able to monitor. And so that piece of it is huge, to jump into being able to look at the wins and just trust that. And all of a sudden, your mind spotlight shifts away from what could go sideways to what are the options and possibilities. And that in and of itself increases spatial awareness. It increases processing speed. It increases target identification. All of those key performance measurements all go up just by being able to get out of that negative attentional bias.
Yeah, that's so huge. I'm glad you said that because, the way we structure our program are for in-person, even virtual, but more in-person is we try to make it fun because we've noticed, with research that fun creates those hormones that allow the neuroplasticity and learning to take effect better.
Yes.
And you usually will have more fun if you have a group environment. So we try to incorporate some group activities with other like-minded individuals, and that tends to increase that neuroplasticity, that learning effect, and then just see better performance.
Absolutely. And if you think about it you look at kids, and kids learn 400 times faster when they're playing versus just rote learning. And we all started there. That's where we're all coming from. So I love that.
So my last question is, we get a lot of athletes who say, I play great in practice, but when it comes to the game, I fall apart.
Yes.
If we want to make that athlete better in game performance, where do we start?
Well, I think one of the big things is, why do they care? What's the difference? And so if we start there and we say, we can ask the irrational question of like, why isn't practice more important to you than the game? And then for them to actually drop into curiosity about, why is that? What is the purpose? What are my attachments to the outcome? Because it really is when we set an expectation. And I think this is the key piece that then ends up impacting the rest of the nervous system. Whenever we set up an expectation, whether it's like this dinner that I'm about to eat right now is going to be so good, I'm really looking forward to it, you're synthesizing dopamine that is going to be released when that expectation is met. And so if you then take a bite of it and it doesn't taste as good, which by the way, it won't taste as good because you already set up an expectation for how high the bar is. Now you're not getting all that dopamine, and it's actually turning into norepinephrine, adrenaline, cortisol, all of our stress chemicals that spikes the amygdala. Our amygdala says something's about to try and get me. And now that pulls all of our resources away from observation. And now we're thinking about performing rather than just being and feeling and responding and coming from that place of play and love of doing what we love doing. And so that ends up on a neurochemical level, creating these micro spikes where the dopamine comes up, drops down into the stress chemical, sends signals out to our body, which also constricts the blood vessels. We no longer are getting as much oxygen to our cells, so our bodies are going to fatigue. Everybody knows this feeling of getting out there when you've had a more kind of expectation and emotion, and it feels like you're just trudging through molasses trying to move. That we're depriving ourselves. We are not releasing the adrenaline and the cortisol in a way that actually increases oxygenation. We're depleting. And so there's that side of it. And then the other side of it is really just when we go into it with, I'm supposed to act this way. I'm supposed to perform this way. It's supposed to go this way. Now our brain is only looking for evidence of it not going that way. So it does the opposite. And so now every little thing, every little hiccup, every little pain in your body is telling you, see, I knew you're going to screw up again this time. Yep, it's not going to happen. And so we are going to end up actually trying to make that expectation come true. Because if we say, I know I'm going to mess up, I know that this isn't going to go well, we get dopamine for that coming true. If that doesn't come true, we feel out of control. So we actually push ourselves into that direction where things go sideways. And then our brain says, well, at least I was right. But then that ends up kind of cascading into identity and performance stuff down the road. So I think one of the big things around that is how do we get ahead of that? And I think one of the ways that we get ahead of that is really looking at the fact that we don't, why do I care? What's my attachment to the performance? Because inevitably it comes back to my team's counting on me, my identity, it's going to say something about me. I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. I'm not capable enough. Dad was right. Whatever those core narratives are that drives that. And then once we step back from that, then looking at, okay, how do we want to be attached to this? Is this something that we want to do? And so we can do it through some of the mindfulness stuff, through some of the somatic, noticing that intensity that's coming up and getting used to it. And then there are some cool guided visualizations where when you really imagine the intensity in your body and you actually breathe into that and expand the intensity and detach from the thought that's causing it, it does become energy that you can just use. That's like, just take it into the game and go with it. And that's really effective as well. And then the other side of it is certainly, nervous system capacity training through biofeedback, neurofeedback, and, some of these other modalities as well.
Yeah, I love that. So three major components that you talked about, right? The biofeedback, the VR system that you have, the visualization, which I actually love hooking up something to check HRV while you're visualizing. I think that's super powerful. And then the mindfulness and really focusing on what story are you telling self? Why are you actually feeling that pressure?
Yeah.
What's the narrative?
Yeah. And so it's interesting.
I think it's a good takeaway for people.
I agree. Simple thing to do. And it's one of those things that when you drop in and you start checking in on that level, it takes the intensity out of it. And you can drop back into why are you even playing in the first place? And getting into showing up and just, competing for yourself rather than feeling like there's some outcome attached to what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. If people were interested in doing this VR-based biofeedback, is this something they can do virtually? How do they get access to this?
Yeah. So the way that it works is if folks want to sign up and do it, they'll sign up through the community app, and then we'll send a headset and an armband, and we do an onboarding call, show you exactly how to do it all, how to get in and look at all of your metrics, and then we'll send you kind of the journal workbook that you can go through with it. You'll have access to the community, and then we'll do once a week coaching where we all jump in and kind of process through what's working, what's not, what's coming up, questions that are happening, techniques of how to be able to bring some more awareness. And then you've got access to the program for a 5-week window, and then if you like it, you can continue on for an additional 6 months and keep using it. And so it's all remote, and it's all kind of shows up at your doorstep.
That's awesome. So, yeah. There's really no excuse if you wanted to do something like this. You can do it from anywhere in the world, or is this restricted
anywhere in
to
the world?
Countries?
No, so far there are certain countries that are not fond of the Meta headsets and of Meta, apparently we found out, but there's plenty of other headsets available out there that we can get you.
So if people already have a Meta headset, are they allowed to have just a license that they can buy through you guys?
Yep, absolutely. And we'll send the armband, and then the rest of the process is all just jump on into the community. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. This was, absolutely, I think, very enlightening for many athletes who are listening. And if they have more questions, I'm going to direct them to your best website, email, and which social media platform do you prefer?
Well, we're on Instagram and Facebook. I think Instagram has a little bit more on there. And so certainly check out NeuroCameron there. And then you can certainly look at the Neuroprogeny page there as well. And then neuroprogeny.com is probably the easiest one to get to.
Yeah, I'll link all of those down below. So if you guys are interested, make sure you check it out.
And I believe we've got a promotion code for you that's actually $1,000 off for folks that are interested in doing it.
So I'll add that in there too.
Perfect. Sounds good.